Imagine yourself standing at a crossroads, faced with a choice. Maybe you are deciding whether to take a new job, what to eat for dinner, or even when to cross the street. These moments, large and small, are shaped by decisions, and behind each one, an extraordinary symphony of neural activity unfolds within your brain. The science of decision-making seeks to decode this symphony, unraveling the intricate dance of brain regions and networks that shape every choice we make. At the heart of this process lies the prefrontal cortex, often described as the brain's command center for thought and action. Located at the very front of the brain, this region supports our ability to flexibly select behaviors, manage competing impulses, and adapt to new situations. Rather than being a single structure, the prefrontal cortex is a collection of specialized areas, each contributing to the complex orchestration of decision-making. It is fundamental for cognitive control, allowing us to weigh possibilities, anticipate outcomes, and suppress inappropriate actions. Acting as an executive, it guides attention, regulates emotions, and helps us exercise self-control in the face of temptation. Researchers have identified a hierarchical organization within the prefrontal cortex where different subregions are responsible for distinct levels of action selection. For example, the lateral prefrontal cortex is closely linked to deliberative, goal-directed decisions, exerting top-down control over our emotional and impulsive responses. When faced with a difficult or emotionally charged decision, the lateral prefrontal cortex helps us pause, reflect, and choose a course of action that aligns with our long-term goals, rather than giving in to immediate urges. But the prefrontal cortex does not work alone. It is deeply interconnected with other regions, notably the limbic system and the basal ganglia, forming a network that underpins decision-making. The limbic system, a collection of structures nestled deep within the brain, including the amygdala and hippocampus, is central to regulating emotions, motivation, and memory, all of which are critical in the decision-making process. When we evaluate choices, the limbic system helps assess emotional salience and past experiences, coloring our decisions with feelings of reward, fear, pleasure, or anxiety. The amygdala, in particular, is sensitive to threats and rewards, influencing how strongly we react to potential outcomes. The nucleus accumbens, another limbic structure, is heavily involved in motivation and the anticipation of reward. These emotional signals are relayed to the prefrontal cortex, where they are integrated with higher-order reasoning. This interplay enables us to balance rational analysis with emotional intuition, a process essential for adaptive decision-making. The basal ganglia, another vital component, lies beneath the cerebral cortex and plays a crucial role in regulating actions, especially under conditions of conflict or uncertainty. Its components, such as the subthalamic nucleus, globus pallidus internal and globus pallidus external, contribute distinct computational roles in decision dynamics. The basal ganglia help set dynamic decision boundaries, allowing us to adjust our level of caution or impulsivity depending on the context. For instance, when a decision must be made quickly with little information, the basal ganglia can facilitate more rapid, though riskier, choices. Conversely, in situations requiring careful deliberation, they help us slow down, gathering more evidence before acting. This system is not merely reactive. It supports learning from outcomes and adapting future choices, a function especially important in environments where rules and contingencies change. The striatum, a key part of the basal ganglia, is heavily involved in reward-based learning. It interacts with dopamine, a neurotransmitter that signals prediction errors, the difference between expected and actual outcomes. When a choice leads to a better-than-expected result, dopamine levels surge, reinforcing that behavior. When outcomes are worse than anticipated, dopamine drops, prompting the brain to reconsider its strategy. These neural mechanisms are not limited to straightforward, well-rehearsed decisions. They also underlie more complex, inference-based decision-making, where we must deduce the best course of action from ambiguous or incomplete information. Evidence suggests that networks involving the prefrontal cortex, limbic system, and basal ganglia support such inference, drawing on memory, emotion, and real-time sensory input to build and test hypotheses about possible outcomes. Another layer of complexity emerges when we consider the dynamic nature of decision circuits. Studies of neural activity reveal that patterns of brain signals often ramp up to a threshold before a decision is made. This ramping to threshold phenomenon reflects the gradual accumulation of evidence in support of one option over another. Once a critical threshold is reached, the brain commits to a choice and the relevant motor or behavioral response is initiated. This dynamic is observed across various brain regions, including the prefrontal cortex and basal ganglia, and is supported by distributed networks that span sensory, parietal, and even cerebellar regions. The anterior cingulate cortex, a region within the frontal lobe, deserves special mention for its role in monitoring conflict and evaluating the value of different choices. It acts as an internal auditor, signaling when our expectations differ from reality or when choices are particularly difficult. This information is then relayed to the prefrontal cortex, which can adjust strategies or modulate attention accordingly. It is important to recognize that decision-making is rarely the product of a single region or pathway. Instead, it emerges from the coordinated activity of widespread networks, each contributing unique perspectives and capabilities. The prefrontal cortex provides executive oversight, the limbic system injects emotional and motivational context, and the basal ganglia regulate action and adaptability. Together, these systems interact through complex circuits with neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin modulating their activity and tuning the brain's sensitivity to rewards, risks, and uncertainties. Researchers have proposed models to conceptualize these interactions, such as the proposer, predictor, actor, critic framework. In this model, different neural components propose possible actions, predict likely outcomes, select actions based on expected value, and critique results to guide learning. The cortex, basal ganglia, and their connections play key roles in this iterative process, supporting both habitual and flexible forms of decision-making. Even in decisions that feel free or spontaneous, the prefrontal cortex is active, linking executive function with working memory to support the temporary activation of choice-related circuits. This allows us to weigh options in real time, consider shifting priorities, and adapt to changing internal or external circumstances. Despite these advances, gaps remain in our understanding. While the roles of the prefrontal cortex, limbic system, and basal ganglia are well established, the precise mechanisms by which these networks interact, especially in unique or highly complex decisions, are topics of ongoing research. Some aspects, such as the involvement of the cerebellum or the integration of social and contextual cues, are less clearly defined in current models. What is clear, however, is that decision-making in the brain is a dynamic, distributed process, one that reflects the interplay of reason, emotion, habit, and learning. Each choice, from the mundane to the momentous, is sculpted by a delicate balance of neural forces, honed by evolution to help us navigate an uncertain world. As neuroscience continues to reveal the inner workings of these circuits, we gain not only a deeper understanding of our own minds, but also the promise of improving decision-making in health, education, and beyond. Imagine life as a series of crossroads, each choice shaped not only by logic and reason but also by the deep undercurrents of feeling, memory, and subtle bias. When we make a decision, whether trivial or momentous, it is rarely a purely rational process. Modern neuroscience has revealed the profound ways in which emotions, recollections, and unconscious leanings work together to guide us, often beneath the surface of conscious awareness. At the center of this intricate dance is the limbic system, a deep brain network that orchestrates our emotional responses and motivations. Research shows that this system does much more than simply trigger fear or joy. It actively participates in evaluating the stakes and nuances of every decision. The amygdala, for instance, acts as an emotional sentinel, alerting us to threats or opportunities and coloring our perception of choices with the shades of past experiences. Meanwhile, the hippocampus serves as a librarian, retrieving relevant memories and helping the brain imagine possible futures. The nucleus accumbens, often linked to reward and motivation, weighs the anticipated pleasure or pain of each potential outcome. These interconnected hubs ensure that our decisions are not just products of cold analysis, but are infused with feeling, context, and personal history. The limbic system is in constant communication with regions of the cortex responsible for higher-order thinking. This relationship is not one-sided. Instead, it is a dynamic exchange where emotional content is analyzed and relayed to the brain's executive centers. The cortex receives these signals, integrates them with ongoing thoughts and goals, and ultimately helps select a course of action. This process highlights an essential truth. Emotion and reason are not adversaries but partners in the act of choosing. Emotions are not simply disruptive forces that cloud judgment. Empirical studies suggest that intense feelings can actually sharpen our decision-making abilities, provided we can recognize and regulate them. When someone is attuned to their emotional state, they can harness its energy, using feelings as valuable data points rather than noise to be ignored. In certain situations, identifying and managing these emotions can lead to more adaptive decisions, especially when circumstances are ambiguous or information is incomplete. Rather than being liabilities, emotions can serve as guides, alerting us to what matters most and prompting timely, appropriate responses. The relationship between emotion and cognition is, in fact, remarkably close-knit. Research reveals that emotions shape a wide array of mental processes, influencing not only how we perceive our environment, but also what we remember and how we act. Emotional arousal can heighten our attention, making certain details stand out while others fade into the background. These emotionally charged perceptions are then more likely to be encoded into memory, creating a feedback loop where emotion and recollection reinforce each other. This interplay is evident at the neural level. Studies using electroencephalography have identified distinctive brain activity patterns linked to emotional decision-making, with changes observed not only in frontal regions but also in parietal and occipital lobes. In essence, making a choice is almost always a whole brain affair, with emotion and reason co-activating circuits across multiple regions. Perhaps most striking is the extent to which our decisions are influenced by emotional processes operating outside of conscious awareness. Some researchers suggest that as much as 90 to 95% of our choices are shaped by these non-conscious systems. The emotional brain acts as a silent architect, guiding our preferences and aversions before our rational mind even begins to deliberate. We may believe we are weighing the pros and cons with perfect objectivity, but in reality, our feelings have already tipped the scales. Yet, this does not mean we are helpless captives of our emotions. The ability to regulate and reframe our feelings can have a powerful impact on the decisions we make. Cognitive strategies, such as reappraisal, reinterpreting a situation to alter its emotional impact, can dampen risky impulses and shift patterns of brain activity, particularly within regions involved in evaluating rewards and punishments. This capacity for emotion regulation represents a form of mental flexibility, allowing us to steer our choices rather than be swept away by instinct. Memory, too, is a crucial player in the theater of decision-making. Every choice draws on a wellspring of past experiences, both recent and distant. The brain does not simply retrieve memories like files from a cabinet. Instead, it actively integrates fragments of relevant experiences to inform current situations. Neuroscientists often describe decision-making as a process of action selection, with memory serving as a database of possible outcomes and strategies. The physical basis of memory, rooted in the synaptic connections and firing patterns of neural networks, allows for rapid yet nuanced retrieval when faced with a new challenge. Importantly, it is not the objective accuracy of our memories that most strongly sways our decisions, but rather the subjective feelings they evoke. When contemplating a choice, we often rely on how we feel about similar past experiences, regardless of whether those memories are perfectly true. This reliance on emotional resonance means that even distorted or incomplete recollections can exert a powerful pull on current behavior. Memories do more than chronicle the past. They forge links that enable quick, intuitive judgments and help us navigate the present with greater speed and confidence. The hippocampus, as research suggests, is especially important in this regard. Its ability to combine and recombine elements of past events allows us to simulate potential futures, a process known as prospection. This mental time travel enables us to evaluate options on the fly, imagining how different choices might play out and adjusting our behavior accordingly. Far from being a passive storehouse, memory is an active, adaptive tool for decision-making, constantly guiding us as we chart a course through an ever-changing world. If emotion and memory are the engines of decision-making, cognitive biases are the hidden forces that steer us, often without our awareness. Cognitive biases are deeply rooted tendencies that shape the way we interpret information and make choices. They arise naturally from the brain's efforts to process vast amounts of data quickly and efficiently, yet these shortcuts can lead us astray. Overconfidence, for example, can cause us to overestimate our abilities or the accuracy of our knowledge, while the sunk cost fallacy tempts us to persist with failing endeavors simply because we have already invested time or resources. Status quo bias nudges us toward sticking with familiar options, even when change would be beneficial. These biases are not quirks of individual personality, but intrinsic features of human cognition, affecting decision-making across both everyday situations and professional domains. Models of human judgment show that biases can operate along multiple dimensions, influencing not just what information we attend to, but also how susceptible we are to error under different circumstances. The way a problem is framed, whether as a potential gain or loss, can sway our preferences. a phenomenon with observable neural signatures involving both emotional and cognitive circuits. In complex modern challenges, cognitive biases can contribute to suboptimal or unsustainable decisions. Recognizing and managing these biases, particularly those that operate unconsciously, is an ongoing task. Unconscious biases, by definition, work below the level of deliberate thought, shaping our responses in ways that may be difficult to detect. Left unchecked, these hidden influences can result in prejudiced decisions or unintended consequences, underscoring the importance of self-awareness and critical reflection. Ultimately, the neuroscience of decision-making reveals a picture that is both humbling and empowering. We are not the purely rational agents we might imagine, nor are we at the mercy of uncontrollable impulses. Instead, every choice emerges from the dynamic interplay of feeling, memory, and bias, a partnership of forces that together shape the arc of our lives. By understanding these influences, we gain not only insight into our own behavior, but also the tools to make wiser, more intentional decisions in the future. Imagine standing at a crossroads, not just choosing between two roads, but weighing future risks, rewards, and the subtle expectations of those around you. The decisions that challenge us most rarely occur in isolation. They are layered with complexity, colored by uncertainty, and woven into the social fabric of our lives. Neuroscience is steadily unraveling how the brain navigates these intricate landscapes, revealing circuits that underlie not only individual choice, but also the social and moral dimensions that shape our actions. Complex decisions, those that depend on memory, involve uncertainty or require balancing competing outcomes, engage the brain in ways that simple, habitual choices do not. Studies linking neural activity to such decisions have found that distinct brain regions become active when we draw on past experiences or weigh future rewards. When a choice is guided by memory, perhaps recalling the outcome of a similar situation, networks responsible for retrieving and updating information are activated, preparing the brain to simulate possible consequences. When reward is at stake, additional circuits signal the anticipated value of different outcomes, guiding us toward what we expect will be most beneficial. These findings highlight that complex decision-making is not the work of a single brain region, but rather a dynamic interplay among areas specialized for memory, value estimation, and prediction. As decisions become more layered, information itself can become a form of reward. Neuroscientific reviews have shown that the brain's reward system is attuned not just to tangible outcomes like money or food, but also to the value of acquiring new information. This subjective value drives us to seek answers, resolve uncertainty, and sometimes even choose to know something unpleasant rather than remain in the dark. The act of seeking information activates circuits that overlap with those involved in reward processing, suggesting that curiosity and the drive to reduce uncertainty are deeply embedded in how we make sense of the world. This neural signaling of informational value helps explain why, in complex environments, people may go out of their way to learn, explore, or double-check even when the practical rewards are unclear. The landscape shifts further when decisions unfold in social settings. Here, the brain must not only weigh personal outcomes, but also anticipate the actions and reactions of others. Social decision-making draws on a network sometimes called the social brain, which mediates empathy, cooperation, and strategic behavior. Comparative research in humans and animals indicates that this network is not unique to our species, but is especially elaborated in humans, supporting our capacity for complex social reasoning. One of the most intriguing findings from brain imaging studies is that distinct neural circuits are recruited depending on whether we are acting cooperatively or competitively. Cooperation, working with others toward a shared goal, has been linked to increased activation in the orbitofrontal cortex and inferior parietal regions. These areas appear to help us evaluate shared outcomes and coordinate actions with others. Competition, by contrast, reliably activates the medial prefrontal cortex, a region associated with self-referential thought and the tracking of one's own performance relative to others. In both cooperative and competitive situations, the brain must balance self-interest with the demands of the social context, but the underlying circuits reflect the contrasting demands of working with versus against others. Further evidence comes from studies that examine how context, whether a situation is framed as cooperative or competitive, shapes neural responses. When people make decisions in a cooperative context, regions involved in empathy and perspective-taking become more active, supporting the ability to understand and respond to others' needs. In competitive settings, the neural emphasis shifts toward areas that help track personal advantage and monitor the intentions of rivals. Both forms of decision-making also recruit the insula and inferior frontal gyrus, indicating that shared circuits may underlie the emotional and cognitive demands of social interaction, regardless of whether the other is a partner or a competitor. The brain's approach to social decisions is far from purely rational. It is influenced by the capacity for empathy and the ability to simulate how others might feel or act. Yet, research suggests that empathy, while important for certain forms of prosocial behavior, may not be strictly necessary for moral judgment. Instead, moral and social decisions appear to arise from distributed networks that integrate reward learning, valuation, and cognitive control. This means that even when empathy is muted or absent, people are still capable of making moral judgments, drawing on other neural systems that assess fairness, harm, and social norms. Within the realm of moral decision-making, neuroimaging has illuminated how the brain responds to different types of ethical dilemmas. For example, when confronted with scenarios that pit direct harm against the greater good, different circuits are engaged than when moral violations are indirect or ambiguous. The emotional and logical components of moral judgment often interact, with emotional reactions, such as a gut feeling of right or wrong, sometimes clashing with more deliberative utilitarian reasoning. This interplay is reflected in neural activity. Emotional regions may spark rapid aversion to causing harm, while frontal areas weigh broader consequences. Further complexity arises when individuals must resolve cognitive conflict, such as when their moral intuitions are at odds with social expectations or personal interests. Activity in the frontal and parietal cortex has been shown to predict how people resolve such conflicts, suggesting that these regions help integrate competing values and guide moral behavior. Moreover, brain connectivity patterns at rest have been linked to moral competence, indicating that the capacity for moral reasoning is rooted in the architecture of the brain's networks, even when not actively engaged in a decision. Real-world decisions often require individuals to act not just for themselves, but on behalf of others. This is especially salient in caregiving contexts, such as when family members must make choices for loved ones who cannot decide for themselves. Research in this area highlights unique neural and ethical challenges. The brain must simulate another person's preferences, values, and likely responses, sometimes without clear guidance. The act of making decisions for others recruits both valuation networks, such as the ventromedial prefrontal cortex and orbitofrontal cortex, and areas involved in empathy and perspective-taking. The result is a complex balancing act between what the decision-maker thinks is best and what the other person might want, set against a background of emotional responsibility and potential conflict. The intricate neural choreography of social and moral decision-making is not only a matter of academic interest, it has real consequences for everyday life, influencing how people cooperate at work, resolve ethical dilemmas in healthcare, or navigate the subtle tensions of group living. As neuroscientists have reviewed, the demands of complex and social environments often push the brain beyond simple reward maximization, requiring flexible adaptation and the integration of diverse forms of information. This can place a cognitive burden on individuals, sometimes leading to suboptimal choices, an issue of particular relevance in psychiatric conditions where decision-making is impaired. Despite significant advances, there are still gaps in our understanding. For instance, while researchers have identified key brain regions involved in cooperation, competition, and moral reasoning, the precise mechanisms by which these networks interact remain a subject of ongoing investigation. Similarly, the role of emotional processes in different types of moral judgment is still being mapped, with emerging evidence suggesting that the balance between emotion and logic may shift depending on the specifics of the situation. What emerges from this body of research is a picture of decision-making as a fundamentally social and context-sensitive process. The brain brings together memory, value, empathy, and cognitive control to navigate the shifting terrain of complex and social choices. Whether we are weighing risks, making moral judgments, or negotiating with others, our choices reflect the coordinated activity of specialized neural circuits, each contributing a piece to the intricate puzzle of human decision-making. As science continues to probe these mechanisms, we gain not only a deeper understanding of ourselves, but also new tools for supporting better decisions in the world beyond the laboratory. Imagine standing at a crossroads, literal or figurative, aware that the choices you make in the next moment could alter not only your own future, but perhaps those of others as well. For centuries, philosophers and scientists have debated how best to improve decision-making. Only in recent years, however, has neuroscience begun to reveal the underlying processes and, crucially, to offer practical strategies for guiding those processes toward wiser outcomes. This journey from laboratory discovery to real-world application is unfolding rapidly, propelled by advances in neurotechnology, behavioral interventions, and a growing awareness of the ethical landscape surrounding efforts to influence the human mind. One of the most promising frontiers is neurotechnology, a field that unites brain science, engineering, and computer science to create tools capable of both observing and intervening in neural activity. Scholars exploring these technologies suggest that, under the right conditions, they could help enhance cognitive functions critical for sound decision-making. Yet, they also stress that meaningful enhancement is not automatic. It requires a nuanced understanding of what cognitive ability means in different contexts, along with careful consideration of individual differences and societal needs. For neurotechnology to truly transform decision-making, prerequisites include rigorous scientific validation, robust safety standards, and thoughtful integration into the environments where decisions are made. Within this expanding toolkit, photobiomodulation, or PBM, has emerged as a technique of interest. This non-invasive method involves exposing the scalp to specific wavelengths of light, which is believed to influence brain function by promoting cellular energy production. Reports indicate that regular use of PBM can improve focus, speed up information processing, and boost memory retention. These cognitive gains, in turn, appear to support more effective decision-making, especially in situations demanding sustained attention or rapid analysis of complex information. While the mechanisms are still being mapped, the implication is clear. Technologies that safely optimize underlying brain states may offer promise for those seeking a mental edge, whether in high-stakes professions or everyday life. Beyond individual enhancement, neurotechnology is also finding a role in shaping collective decisions, particularly in business and organizational settings. Reviews of its application in these domains highlight the use of tools like neural imaging and brain-computer interfaces to analyze consumer behavior, forecast market trends, and even guide leadership choices. By capturing and interpreting neural responses to products, advertisements, or strategic dilemmas, organizations hope to move beyond guesswork and intuition, grounding their decisions in objective signals from the brain. However, these applications are not without controversy. The potential to read preferences or vulnerabilities raises profound questions about privacy and autonomy, demanding ongoing dialogue among scientists, ethicists, and the broader public. The science behind neurotechnology's benefits is rooted in a deeper understanding of how the brain processes information, weighs risks, and adapts to feedback. Neuroscientific studies suggest that interventions targeting specific neural circuits can improve decision-making and reduce the likelihood of adverse outcomes. For instance, research on brain stimulation, another form of neurotechnology, has found that it can enhance decisional flexibility, the ability to shift strategies or reconsider choices in the face of changing circumstances. This has important implications for treating mental health disorders where rigid thinking or impulsivity undermine decision quality. By modulating activity in key brain regions, these interventions may help restore the balance between caution and risk-taking, emotion and logic that is so often disrupted in clinical conditions. Of course, not all interventions require advanced technology. Behavioral neuroscience has also begun to highlight strategies individuals can use to improve their own choices. One such technique is episodic future thinking, which involves vividly imagining possible scenarios and outcomes before making a decision. Evidence suggests that practicing this mental simulation can help people make more considered choices by anchoring their decisions in a clearer sense of future consequences. This approach appears especially useful in curbing impulsive tendencies and fostering patience, as it encourages the brain to weigh long-term benefits over immediate gratification. Another avenue for improvement lies in addressing the unconscious biases that so often distort judgment. Leaders and individuals alike are encouraged to adopt specific strategies rooted in neuroscience to override these biases. For example, taking deliberate pauses before making decisions, seeking diverse perspectives, and reframing problems to highlight overlooked risks or opportunities all engage neural circuits involved in cognitive control and reflection. The goal is not to suppress emotion or intuition, but to create conditions where automatic responses are examined, allowing for more thoughtful and adaptive action. As these interventions become more sophisticated, the intersection of neuroscience and automation is attracting particular attention. Studies suggest that insights from decision neuroscience can inform the design of human automation systems, helping to mitigate behaviors that lead people to overtrust or underutilize automated tools. By understanding the neural roots of trust, vigilance, and error monitoring, designers can create systems that support human strengths while compensating for known weaknesses, potentially reducing errors in domains ranging from aviation to healthcare. Yet for all the promise of these advances, the ethical implications loom large. The ability to influence or even predict decision-making through neuroscientific means brings responsibilities that cannot be ignored. In the realm of criminal justice, for example, the use of neurobiologically informed risk assessments raises questions about fairness, consent, and the potential for reinforcing existing biases. Ethical reviews in this area caution against over-reliance on brain-based evidence for legal decisions, emphasizing the need for transparent standards and ongoing oversight. More broadly, the societal, legal, and health-related impacts of emerging neurotechnologies are the subject of active debate. Case studies underscore the importance of anticipating unintended consequences and fostering public engagement as these tools become more widely available. Questions abound: how should personal data derived from brain activity be protected? Who gets access to cognitive enhancement, and under what terms? What safeguards are needed to ensure that interventions are used to promote well-being rather than manipulation or coercion? Within clinical care, the stakes are equally high. Neuroscience is increasingly informing treatments for mental health and neurological conditions, but with this progress comes the imperative for ethical decision-making. Practitioners must weigh the benefits of new interventions against potential risks, considering not only immediate outcomes, but also long-term effects on identity, autonomy, and quality of life. Special attention is required when working with individuals who may have impaired capacity to consent, underscoring the need for robust ethical foundations in both research and practice. Even the very study of ethics is now being enriched by neuroscientific inquiry. Reviews of the field known as neuroethics highlight efforts to understand how neural processes give rise to moral behavior and the capacity for rational discourse. While much remains to be discovered, this research invites a more nuanced view of human agency, one that acknowledges both the biological roots of moral judgment and the societal frameworks that shape ethical norms. As science continues to uncover the neural underpinnings of choice, the challenge is not only to develop new tools, but also to cultivate wisdom in their use. Advancing ethical neuroscience research will require collaboration across disciplines, vigilance against unintended harms, and a commitment to including diverse voices, especially those most affected by these innovations. The ascent of biology and decision research has brought us closer than ever to understanding the machinery of choice. But it also reminds us that the greatest improvements in decision-making will come not just from technology, but from thoughtful engagement with the values and aspirations that define us as individuals and communities. In sum, the neuroscience of decision-making is no longer confined to academic journals or laboratory settings. It is shaping how we approach personal dilemmas, drive organizational strategy, treat illness, and even define justice and fairness. The tools for improvement are multiplying, some technological, some behavioral, all requiring careful stewardship. The path forward is illuminated by scientific insight, but it is navigated by human judgment, ever mindful of the ethical terrain beneath our feet.